Welcome to the Whiskey Congress. Honest, open talk dedicated to speaking the truth to those who are open to hearing it. Black, white, right, left. Most importantly, honest, bold, and fueled by good whiskey. In Whiskey Veritas, we are Whiskey Congress. Join the evolution.
Whiskey Congress is back in session. Stephen and I are together in the Cleveland studio, and we are joined on the phone by a friend of the show. We call him Market Ben. We mention you on a fairly regular basis. And Ben, I'm going to have to ask you to give your Twitter credentials because I'll screw it up.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me, guys. It's always cool to join you. You guys have such a unique format, so I always enjoy the conversation because it's so, interdisciplinary. You cover a lot of topics, but yeah.
Flattery will get you everywhere.
Yeah, but people want to connect me on Twitter. It's just King of Convexity. Well, I guess we call it X now, but pretty easy, and cool to be with you guys.
Good to have you, Stephen. You and Ben were talking during the week about some issues related to the market, which is his area of expertise. So I would like to punt to you.
Yeah. So Ben, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. We bring you on because you are well-versed in the market, with, what you do and in your analysis. I think it's good to sort of bring you on and sort of level set, trying to remove as much of the politics and sort of bias out of it and just talk about what's actually happening. And one of the things I want to talk about, first thing is energy and oil prices, right? We're starting to see a little bit of a rise in the price of oil. I think right now we're sitting around maybe, like $89 a barrel or something along those lines. And it's projected to go up, approaching that $100 a barrel mark. Can we talk a little bit about just what's influencing that? What is normal behavior? What are some of the normal, typical things we see maybe as it relates to the time of year? And then what are some other sort of outlier factors that could be driving that up? Obviously, Ukraine, Russia, China will be in there, but let's talk about some of the things besides those factors and then get into how Ukraine, Russia, China are all impacting it.
It's a core factor, and the right question to ask because it's obviously directly related to inflation. When we got inflation data this past week with CPI and PPI, and when you really dissect those figures, it's very clear that the spike in crude has put further upward pressure on inflation just as a headline number. Obviously, this is an input. It's a cost input for every business, every consumer. So it's meaningful. And you're right. We're sticking around this $90, a little north of $90 in WTI. I think Brent's a little higher, but, we dipped way below 70. And you'll recall the Biden administration had signaled that they would be refilling the SPR, which they've, depleted. We're in a posture now where we need to replenish, and we've already begun that replenishment at these elevated levels.
Hey Ben, I'm going to stop you real quick. Just SPR is the Strategic Petroleum Reserve.
Yeah,
just for a lot of people aren't hip to a lot of the
I was going to jump in on CPI and PPI.
Yeah, I just want to try.
PPI core, that's just consumer price index. PPI, producer price index. So consumer price index is just kind of what's consumer facing and what the consumer experiences at the retail level. And then PPI is kind of wholesale inflation, so that's what's kind of up the pipeline. And just to point out, the CPI was just a couple ticks hotter than expectation, but the PPI was much hotter than expected. So that kind of tells you that there's a lot more inflation still up the pipeline, and it's largely related to this issue you guys are bringing up regarding energy. And when I talked about the strategic petroleum reserves and the Biden administration starting to pivot towards refilling it, we don't really have that to lean on, and that's largely what kind of helped us bring oil down back below 70. And now you've got OPEC, you've got Saudi Arabia. They're pressuring these prices much higher on a global basis because, for them, they're looking to get to that $100 level that you mentioned, Steve. And so they're cutting production. You still have Russia pretty much offline due to sanctions and so forth. So there's a big dislocation with supply and demand. So energy going higher is it's a geopolitical issue, but it's inflationary for sure as it relates to what we're seeing in the U.S. But I think what also aided to the into the downswing was this this really underwhelming China reopen. There was a expectation that when China reopened post-COVID, post their zero COVID policy, that there would be a big demand spike, and that would push oil higher. And that really hasn't been the case. China still lags behind, and their numbers actually, the recent they published some numbers over this past week that were actually a little bit more robust, but that really wasn't the catalyst that has taken oil higher. It's really been the Saudis and OPEC just cutting production, and now the Biden administration without the SPR to lean on, oil's pressured higher. So that's it's a problem politically, but also economically.
So here's a question: What do you think is depressing the numbers in China in terms of demand? Like, why did that not spike? Right? Because post-COVID, the U.S., we had all of our lockdowns. Nobody was driving. Everybody was remote. So oil was low, which is, when you're talking politically, Trump loves to hang his hat on how low oil was and the price of gas was while he was in office. Well, half your term, nobody was driving anywhere. We go back to work. The demand goes up. We see the spike. Why didn't we see a similar spike in China?
Simply put, they're scared and broke. And unemployed. So they're scared in that they were told that this was a very serious virus. There's not an inclination for these folks to just simply reintroduce themselves into pre-COVID society. There's a lot of hesitation there. Further, I mentioned broke and unemployed. If you look at the unemployment rates, particularly among the younger demographic, which would generally be carrying their economy, there's a 3 billion plus person, demographic here when you think about their population. So these folks aren't working, they don't have money, so demand is obviously low, and you've got a regime right now that's trying to figure out how to spur growth. I mean, one more factor to talk about being broke. If you look at what's created wealth in that country over the last, call it 10 or 12 years, it's largely been related to real estate. You've probably heard about some of these, some of these real estate businesses
like
that
BlackRock
underwrite the loans against the properties, and property values have plummeted. A lot of these businesses are under substantial pressure with regard to their loan exposure. So there's a negative wealth effect there as well. So I think all those factors have contributed to the underwhelming China reopen dynamic that just we just haven't seen it materialize.
So what should we be rooting for? Right? Because a lot of people's thought is because everybody is anti-China that we should be happy that this is happening to China and screw them. But is that the right frame of mind to have?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it's there's so much nuance to that, right?
Yep.
It's not as binary as yes China or no China or pro China or anti China. It's a symbiotic relationship that we have, right? I mean, we need China. China probably needs us more than we need them, but it's a symbiotic relationship, and it's kind of a necessary evil. So I wouldn't necessarily say that we're rooting for China to fail. But what we're rooting for is really this global soft landing relative to avoiding major recession like what we saw in 2007, 2008. And so that's kind of what we're rooting for. So we're kind of rooting for like central banks to coordinate a strategy that's going to, deliver us from that trajectory. Because right now, the macro data suggests that we're seeing a global slowdown that's really meaningful. And if you look at granular data, or you look at the anecdotal data here in the United States, and I can provide some of that too, just from what I see in some of these private equity businesses and some of what's happening in the front lines with retail and discretionary spending. the picture looks pretty negative. So what we're rooting for is not just a Federal Reserve, but global central banks in a coordinated fashion to figure out how do we avoid just completely crushing demand through recession, to tame this inflationary beast. And that's a really tough needle to thread.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of frustration with the Fed on the U.S. side, coming back to domestic, because their answer is increase interest rates, right? And when interest rates go up, money gets more expensive. It gets harder for, businesses to, go out and get capital. Like I have my own business that I've started here over the last year, and, credit restrictions have gotten tighter, because the interest rates are higher. And like I said, money is more expensive. It impacts your budget, especially with me doing, real estate development. You're looking at a $20 million development, and, I have to take out a, $10 million loan. Well, interest rates going up, basically doubling where they were, 3-4 years ago. That's going to grossly impact how my budget looks from a real estate development side, because I have to calculate all that additional interest in because of the rise in interest rates. And as the Fed keeps doing that, it makes it harder and harder for me to do what it is that I do, because I'm so reliant on, pulling in debt to make these projects work. So can we talk a little bit, like, what are your thoughts with what the Fed is doing? Should they continue to push rates up? Should they start to go back the other way, or should we just leave them kind of where they are for now and see if there are other ways that we could help push that inflation down?
Well, there are other tools than just the rate increases. And so a couple facets of this. Number one, I mean, certainly real estate is far more sensitive to interest rates than other business sectors. So that firsthand. That's really problematic. And, I think I can use the term bubble to some extent with regard to what we've seen post-COVID in real estate, at least residential real estate. Commercial real estate is going to be under protracted pressure, in my view. And you probably have an opinion on this, Steve, as well, just insofar. I mean, a lot of the regional banks, when you saw the pressure back in March of this past year with, both First Republic and SBV and others that had a meaningful exposure to CRE, but really it was more the hold to maturity treasury portfolio that they had that really got them in trouble. Yeah. But to your point, credit is drying up, and it's tightening up, and it's a problem. It's not just in real estate, but also other sectors of the private sector, private business. So agree with you on that. And the other tools that I kind of insinuated were, to keep in mind the Fed's still unwinding their balance sheet. They really built a substantial portfolio of risk assets through COVID, when they were not just, buying U.S. Treasuries to stabilize the market. They were also buying high yield debt. So that unwind continues to accelerate. During the SVB crisis, I used crisis loosely because it was mitigated almost immediately through these various Fed facilities. But the balance sheet actually increased for a short period of time, and now it is back to winding down in an accelerated fashion. So that is another form of tightening that is affecting markets in the form of liquidity. To your question about rates, if I were advising the Fed, I think you probably can take another 25 to 50 basis points. I probably think that's what's going to happen before the end of this cycle. And I don't think that's necessarily going to tip anything over. It's going to put more pressure on regional banks for sure. Regional banks, that problem has not been resolved. I can tell you that firsthand. I know that for sure.
You and me both.
that needs to be resolved. But, I think you probably see a 10-year by the end of the year. You probably see a 10-year Treasury somewhere north of 5%. And that's a little bit of an outlier view. But I think all of the macro factors are aligning for that outcome. But if I'm the Fed, I think they'll pause here in September. Next week is the FOMC, so we'll know on Wednesday. I think they pause, and they probably take 25 in November. And then we'll see what, I mentioned CPI and PPI. We'll see what those data points look like the following month, and then maybe they get you another 25 in the first quarter next year. But the market right now is still pricing in at the end of the first quarter rate cuts, and I think that's I'm not sure that that's aligned with reality.
And so I'm seeing that as well. I don't understand it, to be honest with you. I mean, it's almost like, well, if we price it in, like more like if you wish it, it'll come true sort of deal, right? Like if you want it hard enough, then, like maybe it'll happen, and it just doesn't seem like that's the direction that we're going. So it's just kind of bizarre that it's priced in that way.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, the resiliency of the labor market is really what is going to force the Fed to, when the FOMC and Powell specifically, when they tell you higher for longer, there's no reason not to believe them. So the idea that cuts would be coming, I think if we did get cuts, it's for the wrong reasons. If you do get cuts, it's usually because there's some sort of an exogenous event or some sort of a substantial and meaningful economic downturn. And that's not exactly bullish, not just for the economy, but also how we price risk assets. So I think higher for longer is probably the path forward. And if we do get cuts, I don't think it'll be until the tail end of 2024, maybe even into 2025.
Ben, let me ask you a quick question, because you mentioned commercial real estate. And I've been sort of kicking this around in my head since COVID, that so many people used to go into the office in Manhattan, in downtown Chicago, and downtown San Francisco that are no longer doing that. And some companies are really pushing to get people back in the office, and I think it's mostly a CYA by the folks who are responsible for managing that real estate, because their relevance becomes a challenge. But I think that's going to lead to a massive crash in commercial real estate in large cities. What impact would that have on the market, and do you think I'm on the right track?
Well, your concerns are a lot of folks share those concerns. I think they're legitimate concerns because, return to office has really kind of leveled off. And you're seeing, for the most part, 3, maybe 4 days a week tops, with some of these, like you mentioned, some of the major metro markets that are back to office. So that is a major issue, because the footprints that, just the physical footprints that these folks have in these major metros, they're substantial. So as you pointed out, these are liabilities. These are, these are recurring costs that are hitting bottom lines. And if you're paying for it already, right, you want to utilize it with bodies in chairs. But, I think COVID, in my view, there was a cultural change. If you think about it, let's just say you live in Hoboken, New Jersey, and your office is in Lower Manhattan, and you've got to make that commute. You think about the cost and the time involved just to get to and from the office. You're paying probably $20, $25 a day just in tolls over bridges just to get to and from. You're probably spending 3 hours in the car.
Gas, wear and tear on the car.
If you can alleviate that, but right. If you can alleviate that, and maybe you take less in salary to make up for that, but it's just, at what point do you find that efficiency? At what point does the free market kind of, trim that fat? And I think over time, that's just a reality. So I do think that footprints will be reduced. A lot of these businesses have already sublet or repurposed commercial real estate as a result.
So Ben, I'll jump in real quick. So 2 points to this conversation. One, because post COVID, I saw myself, like early on when I had left my company, I had gotten contacted by a few different headhunters, and at the time, I was very focused just on building our company up. So I wasn't really looking for jobs, but I was getting interest in interviews from companies in different places like New York, even California, for real estate development because they were kind of expanding to the concept and the idea of you can do this and not physically be here. We don't need you to be in the office. Everything is done digitally. Most places don't even, hire, operating places don't use paper. And so there wasn't a need for me to be in New York. But the interesting thing was, I was talking to a recruiter who was with a firm in New York, and, we were talking about the salary. And it was substantially more than I would make in Cleveland. It was more along the lines of a middle of the road salary in New York, but that was so much more than what I would make here. And she was explaining to me that they would still end up paying less, for me to be in Ohio, to basically working a job in New York. But they could, essentially they were offering to pay me less than someone who actually lived there. And so for them, even though I felt that salary was substantially higher, for them, it was basically a deal if they could get me in, because, all the things that they, one, don't have to worry about paying for in terms of actual space and everything else. But because of that regional difference in pay, right, like they could still pay, $175,000, but someone in New York, that the expectation for that same role would be north of 200, right? But for me, like in Cleveland, that same role is going to pay me about 110, right? So I'm looking at it like, wow, this is a huge jump for me. Meanwhile, for them, they're like, this is a steal, right? Like, so they're seeing some of that, with the more availability of remote work between Teams and Zoom and everything else. Like you can basically be there without being there. And then the other part of it, when you mentioned repurposing, if we did see this sort of mass exodus of, these companies leaving these kind of commercial real estate situations, it does create opportunity. And this is a heavily me-focused conversation right now. But again, what I do in affordable housing development, a big movement right now is the adaptive reuse of these commercial buildings, right? Like I'm looking at a building right now, in the Youngstown, Ohio area, that was a former office building that would convert well into, single bedroom, 2-bedroom units, that I could probably stack 50 apartments in,
Right.
And so looking at it, like for a person like me, if we did see a big exit, which we're kind of starting to see, there does lie opportunity, where it may not help the business that is leaving that building all so much, but between the fact that we've got a housing crisis where there isn't enough housing for people, and we don't have enough.
You guys cut out.
I'm sorry. Hey, Jim.
I'm trying to see what's happened.
Can you still hear me?
You guys there? I got a deadline.
All right, are you back? Sorry, Ben.
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about that. So, because we have a housing crisis, like that would present an opportunity for a person like me to go in and say, all right, I'll buy this building, I'll convert it to housing, and sort of basically solving a couple problems at once, right? Like I take the building off of the company's hands, and then we've got housing in a place where people may have access, for those people who still have to go into work into these urban areas, right? It gives them kind of closer to where they need to be. So there is potential opportunity there. Now, I alone can't do that, but I'm not the only developer that's seeing that sort of opportunity there. So there could be
Right.
there could be some benefit to it, even if it's not. Even it's just a question of who it benefits the most.
Sure. Well, two things. The first issue you brought up about remote work and just access to talent with regard to New York to Chicago, et cetera. Excuse me, New York to Cleveland, Chicago, any major metro to a mid-market. You're absolutely right. Now, all of a sudden, if you're a New York-based business, instead of being hyper local with regard to your access to talent, now, of course, it's nationwide. So there's way more efficiencies from a cost basis that you can take advantage of if you find the right people and you find the right systems and you have the right culture and the right training, and huge advantage to create efficiencies with regard to talent acquisition and supporting those costs on your balance sheet. Second issue that you spoke of in detail, and you know this, I'm sure even better than I do, and it's your business. The biggest issue I've seen with regard to repurposing is really just basic infrastructure within the building. There's plumbing, for example. I mean, a lot of these office buildings have, one bathroom on a whole floor to support, an office space. But if you're going to have single unit living spaces, it's like you got to replumb the whole damn thing. So a lot of times it's like, is it just worth it to tear the building down and rebuild? I mean, I know that's been a problem with some of the buildings in downtown Cleveland that they've tried to repurpose and had issues. Even in Tower City, they had an issue with some of that.
Yep.
So, I know that that's a big problem with just the way these buildings were built with the purpose of being office space and to repurpose them for single units. I know that can be a problem, but for the right developer and the right guy, to your point, it can really represent big opportunity. But I know that's one of the headwinds that some of this repurposing is faced.
Yeah, and in my and your ability to really do your feasibility study and put a lot of thought into it, because I think there's a lot of developers out there that are more about volume. And so they're trying to, it's just like, all right, we got to get a project done every 18 months, bing, bang, boom. So they go into these and they go to do their feasibility study of the building, and they're not opening up enough walls. They're not really, they in some instances, they're not doing a deep dive into the actual original drawings of the buildings to see what's there. And in some of these older buildings, good luck finding the drawings and being able to do that assessment. But it really comes down to attention to detail because, I've done it. I've done it in Baltimore. We took a building and we were able to convert it. And it was a challenge, right? It was a challenge. It took a little longer than expected. That one had a 22-month construction schedule. And we ended up getting it done in 24 months. I think the budget on that was like 20 or 28, 29 million. And it ended up going over budget by a couple million. And a lot of that was due to the exact issue you said was the plumbing. Not only was we had to add plumbing, but it was the way it was put into the building was basically a jigsaw puzzle, which was really interesting. In a very expensive and, Stephen is punching walls sort of way. But, but we were able to get it done. And a lot of that was just because we had a really good architect who was really, really paid attention to detail. And we had a good contracting team. Now, again, like that, there's another problem talking about labor. Having enough labor to do that type of work is also something that I think is putting pressure on the market because the skilled labor to build, we just do not have it, right? Like my dad
it's tight. And also to your point, I mean, there a lot of these municipalities in these, they're providing grants, as you know, and support to repurpose these buildings because it's in their best interest as well. And it brings people into the city centers. And so that's good for everybody. It reinvigorates the local economy and the downtown vibe and business. And so there's a lot of factors to it. And you're absolutely right. And by the way, just a personal anecdote, I mean, one of my favorite periods of time living in Cleveland before I spent a lot of time living in Chicago, but I lived downtown at the Hat Factory, an old repurposed factory. Yeah. And I loved it. It was I loved being there. It was a great space.
Was that right above the map room?
Wonderful. And it was just great to be in an urban center for that period of time. And so, some of this repurposing that's being subsidized by municipalities and local governments, I think it's really great. And hopefully we can, again, just kind of counteract some of the work from home stuff. If you get people living in city centers, that actually even further alleviates pressure from businesses having to pay premiums to source the best talent. So it's great to see.
Hat Factory, that's above the map room, right? Or right next to it?
It was on West 6th Street, so it was right across from the old Liquid. Now it's
that's right. Okay.
It was above essentially Tequila Ranch.
Yeah, Tequila Ranch with that mechanical bull inside.
Yes, we're now having if you're in Cleveland listening to this all makes sense. If you're not, sorry.
Or hey, people travel.
This is going way back.
Yeah.
Way back. But it was a fun place.
All right, so I do want to talk a little bit about electric vehicles, their impact on the market, sort of where that's going. My view on electric vehicles, just in general, I always thought the concept was cool. I've always said that, you give me a good looking, full size truck that, I would definitely get an EV just because, putting gas in a truck every other mile, it seems like at times, is obnoxious. And so not being not having to be, sort of hostage to gas prices would be cool and still have my full size truck with all its full capabilities. I thought Elon Musk was answering that call, and then he did that fucking Cybertruck, and I've never wanted to punch someone I didn't know more when they released that monstrosity of a stupid thing.
This has come up like 10 times on the show.
I know. Ben, it drives me nuts, and it's such the. It's almost like he literally did it to like a middle finger to people like me, right? He's like, all right, I'm going to do a truck, but it's not going to be something that you like. It's going to be what I like, so I'm going to go Cyberpunk.
It's like the Pontiac Aztek meets the the DeLorean from fucking Back to the Future.
Yeah,
It's a fucking clown show.
the Aztec meets the Volt meets my asshole.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but to the broader sense, right? Like, I mean, I think Biden and his administration are pushing electric vehicles. They want so many by 2030. There's a lot of questions, and I think we've even talked about it. Like, do we have a power grid to support it? There's range anxiety. There's all this sort of things. I mean, my issue is like, look, building these cars is not exactly doing the world, the climate, or the environment any favors. With the materials that you have to use to put these batteries in, and some of the different features that they're using in the windows and the glass and the electrical and everything else. So, like, where are we going with these EVs, Ben?
Well, clearly, the government's incentivizing these vehicles in this format, so that is going to govern behavior to a large extent. And so adoption there is momentum behind adoption. Ecologically, I mean, like, let's be very real about this. I mean, these are electric vehicles. I mean, how do we source electricity? Right, burning coal for the most part.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, let's just be real about whether or not this is really an ecological thing. I mean, and by the way, we haven't figured out what to do with some of these batteries, which are loaded with heavy metals and all other kinds of like deleterious chemicals from an ecological standpoint. So the notion that these are somehow like some ecological silver bullet, I think, is a little bit misguided. With regard to getting the consumer, to your point, not beholden to the price of oil, that's a good argument, and I embrace that. Look at consumer behavior right now, and actually, you just saw a note this past week with what Ford's doing, and you brought up full-size trucks. The F-150 Lightning from Ford, very expensive vehicle, beautiful fucking truck.
Yep.
If you've seen, it's a really nice vehicle for sure, and all the ancillary usages with regard to its power sources. I mean, you could use it as an external generator
for your house. Yeah,
if you want
amazing.
to. But it's very expensive. And so what Ford has done, because demand is pretty low on this because of its SRP, elevated SRP, they're starting to divert more of the dollars to the hybrid version. So, it's ICE technology, but it's, complemented with an electric battery that's, supplements in a hybrid format. So I think the consumer really kind of wants the hybrid, because you brought up range anxiety. I think that's one of the biggest issues with regard to people going full EV. So I think EV, there's momentum behind that. I wouldn't push back. I mean, look, the Mercedes offerings, Cadillac Lyriq, the BMW offerings. I mean, there's some really beautiful EVs out there.
Here's a question, Ben. Would you buy one?
Yeah. And so, I mean, when it comes to EV broadly, I think adoption will likely accelerate, mostly due to all the incentives. And that could change with a different administration, by the way, I should say.
Yep.
But you're starting to get into the real crux of the brand issues and who are going to emerge as the winners. And, everybody likes to think that Tesla is going to be the winner. And I brought this point up a lot. Driving a Tesla, the implicit, I mean, you guys know this. I mean, you see a guy driving a Tesla on the road. What's your immediate assumption about the guy driving that car? That he's a Musk simp, right?
Yeah.
That he's going to, he's somebody that's, I don't want to like totally impugn these people because it's a total assumption, but it's like if I were walking around town wearing a Steelers jersey, people are going to assume I'm a Steelers fan, right?
Right.
If I'm running around town driving a Tesla, they're going to assume I'm a Elon Musk fan. Now, Ford doesn't have that issue. Most people see a Ford F-150 on the road, they don't think of Jim Farley. Somebody sees a Chevy Silverado on the road, they don't think of Mary Barra. It's because these people don't talk shit when they're tweaked out on ketamine at 3 a.m. tweeting out weird shit. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so these people stay in their lane and just do their business because they're professional CEOs. Elon Musk is he's a total wild card. So
he's a celebrity,
yeah. So what you have is a brand issue, right? So Tesla, their total addressable market should be huge. But because Elon Musk is such a polarizing figure, whether you agree with him or not, a lot of people obviously agree with him, but whether you agree with him or not, it's, people don't want to observe. I saw something on Twitter just overnight where it was like one of these big time Tesla bulls he posted some video about somebody that wanted to he was driving a Tesla, somebody wanted to key his car. And they caught him on video, and the person's like, "Yeah, I don't like Elon Musk. Why I was gonna key your car." Now just think about it. Why would you want to absorb that type of liability? Like, if I'm driving around in a Tesla and people just assume I'm an Elon Musk, and a lot of people hate Elon Musk, and they're going to key why would I take on that liability?
Right.
Even if I like Elon Musk, right? So there's an addressable market issue, I think, when it comes to Tesla. But EVs broadly, the government's going to continue to support and subsidize and incentivize. And so I do think there's momentum behind EV. But I personally, I have an ICE vehicle. I have no interest in going EV in the short term or medium term. So for me, I'm happy with what I got. I can get gas on any corner that I need it, and I'm cool with it. So I'm not one that's I guess I'm just not the target demographic.
So where I sit on this is my daily driver, I'm a truck guy, and that won't change. I would like Ram is coming out. They're releasing their EV truck next year, here in 24. So I'll look at it, depending on where I'm at financially. But I think I'll stick with a nice vehicle, internal combustion engine, for those trying to figure out what ICE is. But I'll be honest, the Corvette E-Ray, I watched that thing eat everything that they put on the drag strip beside it, and now I have to have one.
Right. Yeah.
Dude, I watched that car. Like, first of all, when they shifted the Corvette to the mid-engine, like I know a lot of traditionalists like lost their shit, but I'm just a car guy. I like all of them. I like old school muscle. I like hypercars. I don't care, European, American, whatever. Just I want to go fast. And that Corvette E-Ray was eating the Porsche 911, the Lamborghini, the Ferrari. It ate the Tesla S, the Bugatti. It's stupid. I don't know if I saw it against the Lucid Air, that Lucid Sapphire Air. That thing is also ridiculously fast. But if I can get my hands on a Corvette E-Ray, then that black streak you see going down 90, that's me.
Well, I'll keep my eyes open for sure.
Right, don't blink.
But the other layer to this, and I think a lot of what has driven demand through EV is some of the full self-driving, the autonomous driving potential. And this kind of goes. We've talked about this in previous conversations. We go back to like Minority Report. You guys remember that old school movie Minority Report?
With your boy, with your twin.
Yeah, we reference it all the time when us talk. And you'll remember how those vehicles worked. But those vehicles were working on smart infrastructure, and we still have dumb infrastructure, right?
Right.
So it's like the idea that full self-driving is some key that's going to unlock, further like accelerated adoption and just a complete evisceration of legacy ICE vehicles. It just doesn't seem to be imminent in my view.
Yeah.
So
No, it's not anytime soon. Like there's so many factors. We our roads are shit. Our pedestrians are idiots. Our cities aren't designed well as it is. So there's a lot of factors in there that are I think will slow the adoption of people want they love the concept of it. And for some people, if you do a long drive, like I got a buddy who lives in Raleigh, and he doesn't commute, but he often drives to Baltimore from Raleigh, and it's not a super long drive, but he uses he's got a Tesla, and he uses that auto drive feature, autonomous feature on a regular basis. But if you're just a daily driver driving around like in an urban setting in a city, whatever, you're going to be less inclined, comfortable, and just basically because of other drivers on the road. Right, and how much trust do you have in this vehicle to be able to have your same awareness, right? And I think there's a lot of hesitancy there, and so I think we're a ways away from wide scale adoption and having it be, really effective without a lot of issues, right?
I totally agree. And keep in mind too that as adoption does accelerate and people, assume that it's going to, kind of fade ICE vehicles into obsolescence. If it does put enough pressure on oil prices, for example, lower, people with ICE vehicles that were like, well, I was incentivized to go EV because gas was so expensive. Well, now all of a sudden gas is much cheaper because everybody's driving EVs. Why the hell would I change? And that technology is it's not going anywhere. So I think there's going to continue. That's why I think Ford was smart to kind of pivot to the hybrid model, because that's where the consumer's at. And I don't think that's going to change for a substantial period of time.
I mean, I consider myself a pretty serious environmentalist. I am one of those people who has resisted the idea of EVs because of range anxiety. And so the hybrid to me is actually like this buys me that comfort. So I think I'm kind of that target audience.
Sure, and Jim, to your point, it's coal fueled technology, right? It's coal fueled energy. It's heavy metals in these batteries. We haven't figured out what to do with them when they, exhaust their usefulness, right? I mean, there's a ton of ecological factors that are far under discussed when it comes to EVs. It's not some magic bullet. What would be, and this is kind of out of the box here. I shouldn't say it's out of the box. We see it with buses run on hydrogen technology, right? Hydrogen is probably the cleanest out there.
So why aren't we using that more?
Hydrogen. Why aren't we talking about that with regard to cars?
Yeah. So I thought for the exact reason you just said, a friend was talking to me about hydrogen, and I was like, I think it's great. For whatever reason, we're not seeing it. And me and him were smoking a cigar in the lounge. The next day, here in Cleveland, it was a RTA bus, and there's a big sign on it, fueled by hydrogen. And I'm like, well, hold up, right? Like, if you could do it in a damn bus, right, that's carrying people all around town all day in Cleveland, where you've got people from Parma driving, which that's Walking Dead over there. Then why can't you put it in? Why can't you just take that and put it in my truck?
It makes you scratch your head, doesn't it?
Hydrogen's dangerous, though.
Dude, it's on a bus.
Hydrogen driving a tow motor around an auto shop. It's like these little tow motors run around on hydrogen tanks. It's like, well, wait a minute, why isn't this being used in passenger cars in a commercial level? I don't get it.
Okay, it's dangerous, but this is Cleveland. You've seen the same sort of accidents I do. We've got buses driving around. Listen, I saw a bus when I was working downtown. Right, I saw one of the wildest things that I still don't know exactly what happened. There was a bus on its side and a Ford Fiesta on its hatchback with the lights pointed up to the sky. I don't know what happened. I still don't, right? And it was the most bizarre thing, and I was really hungry and going to lunch, so I didn't have time to investigate. But my point is okay, so... But if they're willing to put it, because think about it, you said it's dangerous.
It is.
But they
that
put
doesn't mean it can't be fixed.
Hold on. If it's so dangerous, why the fuck would they make it a vehicle that they use for public transportation? That seems like the last place it would be if it were so dangerous.
Well, I could bring up the Hindenburg and tell you how dangerous it can be. That was a hydrogen-filled balloon, and that did not go well.
Okay, that's true. Can't argue that. And that was not great.
No, but that was 1940s technology or 30s technology. So they probably have ways to make it better now. And maybe you can make it safe where there's automatic shuttle.
It's in public transportation buses right now.
I understand, and I don't know what they've done to make it safer. And maybe they can make it reliable. And the great thing about it is you burn hydrogen, you produce water. So you produce water vapor. No carbon impact, no nothing. If it can be done safely, it would be awesome. I don't know what they do to make it safe, and I think that's why people resist it.
But I can't go with that argument that it's not safe. If they're putting it in buses and they're using it in tow motors in factories, right? U.S. factories don't have the history of being the safest, right? But I feel like that. Go ahead, Ben.
Well, I was just going to say, how many tow motors or buses are you seeing explode? It's an apples and oranges. The Hindenburg, that was the hydrogen was used to, elevate.
Yeah, make it float. Sure.
It wasn't propulsion.
Correct.
The way it's used in buses, it's a completely different application of the technology. But yeah, is there a potential that some of this stuff is combustible? Could it? Sure. But
cars explode every day.
Capacity to avoid that issue. And like Steve said, I mean, it's the application with regard to city transportation, mass transportation. It's been demonstrably safe.
All I'm saying is that is the argument against it, and I'm sure there's been technological advances that make that argument maybe invalid. I mean, there's lots of things we do today that we started doing in 1950, and they're completely irrelevant, but we've been doing it that way forever. So whatever it is, I don't know.
I just, again, I mean, go out and get a 83 Gremlin and have somebody run into it with a bike from the back and everybody's dead, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like they have to take the
Pinto was the famous one, right?
Pinto, I'm sorry. But those are all the same terrible car. But I mean, I'm just, I mean, we've got cars filled with gasoline.
Right.
Gasoline goes boom, with relative ease, right? Little light a match.
I mean, I don't want to go down the road. I do want to talk about the scene in the movie Top Secret where they touch the back of a Pinto at like 1 mile an hour. The thing explodes like a nuclear bomb. One of my favorite.
But I mean, it's just bringing up the hydrogen. That's just something that's interesting. And there's conspiracy theorists out there that's saying that the oil lobby is preventing hydrogen and assassinating people who bring it up. And then who knows? But I think it's definitely an interesting idea, and I'm curious as to why it's not getting pushed. But I do want to move, like sticking in the world of cars. We got the UAW.
By the way, one last thing. Don't forget we had steam-powered locomotives in the 1920s that were literally running on just nothing but steam, right?
Coal-fueled steam.
Well, sure, but the point is, there's just this is all analog technology that can be re-engineered in so many ways, and it's just what's you sometimes have to step back and understand what's the most profitable at scale, right? So that kind of dictates what's available from a commercial standpoint, and maybe that's why hydrogen is de-emphasized or hasn't been adopted broadly. There's just so many different layers to what gets produced at scale and what's commercialized. So it's not always just what's most efficient or most ecological. Sometimes it's what's most profitable.
So I want to jump into the UAW strike, right? We're talking about cars, sure. Auto industry. This is always, I always feel bad when you have these sort of strikes, because it impacts so many people, right? You've got the workers who aren't getting paid, the workers that are out there protesting and demanding, fair wages. This one, I don't know if the auto industry, if the automakers, they don't have much of a leg to stand on. You're talking about record profits the last few years, really the last, decade. Like the workers are saying, hey, we helped to kind of dig you out of that mess in 2008. The debt got paid.
Let's be honest. The government.
Yes, the government dug them out, but you needed workers to make that work, right?
Yeah,
to get to a point where you could pay that debt back, and then
they needed jobs,
right?
So.
But I'm just saying, so it seems like you're more on the side of the automakers here. To talk to us a little bit about this. And it's not fair to say sides, but I mean,
look, I know it's a polarizing topic, and people are passionate about it on either side for obvious reasons. I mean, we're talking about people's livelihoods here, but you use the word "what's fair." I'll just share an anecdote. Really good friend of mine from high school. His dad was a union official, and he got him right out of high school. Got him a job as an electrician at GM, and this is going back in the last. Let's go back to like 1999, 2000. He was making north of 100K, and I'd spent a lot. We hung out all the time, and he bragged to me about he worked third shift. He'd show up drunk. He drank all night. He'd go to the bar before he went to the shop, playing cards all day, napping through the shift. He's like, I don't do shit. I can't get fired because I'm in the union. And it was a total blow-off job to him. And he was making all. So you wonder how that factors into the SRP of a car. And, and again, inflation adjusted, you go back to $100,000 in 2000. I mean, inflation adjusted now, you're talking like 175, 180 grand. And it's like, these guys are demanding a 40% pay increase. They want a 4-day work week, and they want guaranteed pensions. and I'm sorry, man, guaranteed pension, that's a relic of the past. 40% increase in your pay. I've got no issue with unionization from an ideological standpoint, right? I don't have a problem with unionized labor. I just need to see the demands be commensurate with the value delivered. And if, as a union, you have to self-police this fucking shit. You can't have fucking, dead wood people pulling this shit like what I just described and think that you're going to come to the table and be taken seriously. And by the way, they talk about record profit margins. Fucking pull up a goddamn chart and look at the last 6 to 8 to 10 years of GM and Ford and Stellantis. You see margin compression like crazy. I mean, these operating margin for these OEMs is like 6 or 7%. These guys aren't making a lot of money. It's all about scale, right? So it's not like these guys are making money hand over fist. So this notion that these guys are, the CEOs get paid a lot, but look, if you're jealous of the CEO, fucking move up the chain. I mean, not everybody can be a fucking CEO. Now, I'm not going to sit here and defend CEOs getting paid exorbitant amounts of money. By the way, a lot of it's tied to performance and stock performance and so forth. But, come on, you got to, if the union were to get the demands that they have on the table, what's going to happen from
price of cars is going to go through the roof.
Prices of cars are going to go substantially higher. It's going to make it less affordable, just like housing is right now, right? Residential housing, that is, Steve, and you know that firsthand. And it's going to price people out of the market, and it's just going to create more of a wealth gap. So, in my view, they need to come to terms. I'm not necessarily saying the union shouldn't press for incremental demands, but what's on the table right now to me is absurd.
So we kind of got into a lot of the different things I wanted to address. So, as it relates to the union, this hits really close to home because my father works for GM, but
right.
He's not in the union. So he's in the upper management. So he's not in the union. And my dad's job, right, when they pulled him into Lordstown, was to look at the plant, right, and solve for inefficiencies. They were having a ton of accidents. They were, literally losing whole ass pieces of giant equipment. It was just
theft.
To theft or just flat out put
negligence?
it on.
Okay.
Yeah, negligence, right?
Okay.
We're going to put this on all of it, right? And so what he was able to do over the course of a few years was turn it around to Lordstown was the least efficient plant in terms of safety and productivity and everything in GM's, plant roster. And he got it to the second or third most productive out of all of GM's plants in the country. And a big part of that was he had to sit down with the unions and tell them, look, I'm not negotiating on behalf of the company. I'm not telling you what to do, but, because you're not policing your people, these things are happening, right? You've got people who, that are getting legitimately injured. Then you have the people who are full of shit and not doing anything at all, but they're putting more pressure on the people that are actually working. And he just sat down and had a real conversation with them. Now, this took months, over a year, to get them to sort of start to clean up their act. But once they did that, what they saw were just these so much greater productivity and efficiencies and everything else that then what they were able to do by self-policing and sort of cleaning things up. Then all of a sudden, when they got to their most efficient and highest producing point, then their ability to negotiate became so much stronger.
Exactly right. 100%. And that's what I'm saying.
And that's right. And that's really what needs to happen. It should come internally from the UAW, right? And they should recognize that as a whole. But that's really what would give them a much stronger bargaining position. And to your point, asking for a 40% increase is ridiculous because you have to understand that gets passed on to the consumer. And then if consumers can't afford the stuff that you're making, then you're not going to be making it because you're going to get laid off. So I agree with you, reducing what those demands are, bringing them more in line with reality, doing the self-policing. But I still think it's worth having the conversation, right? It's because to your point, this can't be just a black and white corporate versus the union. You have to look at all the factors. And so when I was talking about what's fair, it really was kind of everybody taking a step back in looking like what is going to get us all to where we want and need to be, right? And so union, you got to ask for less and you got to be better. Company, you got to pay more and be willing to, but figuring out how to find that balance. And we'll see how long this lasts. We'll see what the overall impact is. Because this is also going to drive up, right? Like if they're not producing cars, and you're going to see, car dealerships are going to start laying off salespeople, right? And then people are going to, you're not going to get cars into these dealerships, and the few cars that they have, they're going to put even more of a premium on them, and that's going to drive prices up. So then
there's a cascading effect, and in fact,
what happens when the strike is over? Those prices aren't going to come back down.
And she was pretty articulate on this point when she talked about the fact that, and again, this is just kind of her, whatever their internal analysis is, but for every job laid off or potentially every union, there's 6 jobs up the supply chain, right, when it comes to just parts suppliers and different component suppliers and stuff like that are affected by this. So there is a cascading effect for sure. And keep in mind, Ford and GM have largely anticipated the strike, so production had been, ahead of demand. So they have a pretty solid pipeline of inventory. And the union, on the other hand, UAW, this is, their strike fund is pretty depleted. Like they don't have a lot of money to fund these people. You get still paid when you're on strike. The union will pay you until they run out of money. If the strike fund runs out of money, that's going to happen in a matter of weeks. Whereas the OEMs, these guys have inventory for 6, 8. In the case of Stellantis, they've got like 12 months of inventory with the Jeeps and stuff like that. I mean, they've anticipated this. So, right now the union is running a hardcore, kind of PR campaign to get their messaging out there and kind of, this pro-labor kind of, call it some sort of an everyman kind of relatable messaging. And it's effective, and I commend them for that. But they're raising on a busted flush here because they don't have the runway that the OEMs do.
I love the poker reference, man.
By the way, just yesterday, GM already laid off like 600 people at one of these Michigan plants. They said, you know what, you want to fuck around? 600 of you guys,
pack
your shit and get out of here. You're done.
So I want to jump out of car market stuff, get more into the political stuff.
Sure.
Donald Trump getting the gag order. I think this is interesting. The people, the Trump supporters are, going down their usual route, not looking at anything that is actually true or factual. Talking about free speech and everything else. Jim, give me your thoughts. Right, you put this on the board.
I did put it on the board. So my thought is this is a very complicated issue, and
no, it's not.
Well, okay, it's going to be a difficult thing for the courts to navigate.
No, it's not.
Because, here's why I think it is. Because they're saying you can't say things that are directed at court officials. You cannot say things that are directed at potential witnesses, which is what gag orders are for. Mm-hmm. And we're in the first time in our country's history where the former president of the United States is the one who's got this. He's got his own platforms. He's got a mob behind him. And he's going to defy the order. And then what do? Put him in jail?
Okay.
You can't.
So, the fuck I can't? Why can't I? Why can't I?
How are you going to manage putting the former president who is under Secret Service protection in a jail cell?
Easy. Show your ass up to Rikers. We're booking you. We're putting you in. This is an official court order. This isn't hard, right? It's clear what he's not supposed to do. So he violates it. You have an evidentiary hearing. And now look, here's the thing. The penalty for this, I think it's the max penalty for violating a gag order is 10 days in jail, maybe 30, depending on the location. And then the max fine it's not going to be more than $1,000, maybe $5,000 at the most.
I have no idea.
So I'm pretty sure you argue that Trump isn't a real billionaire, but I'm pretty sure he can afford $1,000. And, the jail thing, if it were me because I'm a petty bitch, I would absolutely put his ass in jail. But, will this judge...
security issues related to...
Listen, he needs to think about that. The Secret Service is there...
Well, no, I'm thinking about his supporters literally breaking him out of jail and having...
His supporters going to break him out of Rikers? His supporters are going to break him out of Rikers.
Well, he'd be going to jail in Georgia.
Or I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was thinking about New York. Because
but I'm sure
he's indicted in 4 states. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. Right, that I got one wrong. But okay. But listen, county jail in Georgia. Okay. I mean, if they really think that like you want to break, what are they going to do? They're going to do jailbreak?
Steve, what are they going to do, or what are they going to try to do?
So now I'm rooting for it. Now I'm rooting for it because I want to see Bubba roll up in his truck, right? Throw the straps around the bars on the window and try and rip his axle out, try to rip it out.
I do not believe that would be their strategy, although I won't rule it out.
I mean, I don't know. Like, so the reality is they're not going to put him in jail. They'll just fine him. Right, they'll just fine him, and because there's the penalty for violating a gag order isn't for a guy like him, right? It's not that steep because realistically, you're right. They're probably not going to put him in jail. They will fine him, or depending on the judge and their mood, maybe they do put him in jail, right? And what's he going to do? Is he going to defy that order, have a warrant out for his arrest, and make this messy? He could.
I could see him doing
that. But I mean, at that point, I think I think you have to, at some point, somebody's got to hold the motherfucker accountable, right? And so I think this is, I don't think this is that difficult of a decision. I think if he violates it, you hit him with a fine first. If he violates it again, then you say, all right, fine, then you will go to jail. I don't care about your Secret Service. If they want to go in, I guess they can. No, they can't. But I mean, you send him in jail, right?
He's definitely probably too dumb, fat, and slow to pull the shit that guy in Pennsylvania pulled with him getting broken out. That guy, he was out for like a week, man.
2 weeks.
Was running wild.
Right.
I don't think Trump, unless he put a bucket of KFC or something in front of him, I don't think he can. I don't know what's going to motivate him to be able to accomplish something like that.
I know he's a big McDonald's guy, or give him a dry ass steak and ketchup. God, he's such a.
but no, I think to your guys' point though, the real issue is, all the fanfare aside with regard to his, these court proceedings that and by the way, multiple charges on multiple fronts in
91.
multiple states,
91
for multiple issues, which are mostly legit. And so in some cases not legit, I should say. There's some that are more, I think, politically motivated, but let's put that aside for a moment. The question is this guy on the ballot in 2024? And it's really hard to see that materializing, in my view. So I think Trump is a paper tiger at this point, and it's unfortunate. And you guys, we've both, we've talked about this, and you guys have had me on the past. He's just such a cancer to the conservative ideology. If the GOP were smart, they'd turn the page here and figure out. I mean, I don't think DeSantis is necessarily your answer. We could talk about this Vivek guy. Young guy, sharp guy. I know Vivek because of the Strive Fund, and he was an anti-ESG guy in the private equity and the financial space. That's how I knew Vivek before he got into politics. I think he's an impressive guy. He's tried to kowtow a little bit to the MAGA community, so he's a little bit polarizing. But the question is, all of these issues, is Trump still legitimately on the ballot in 2024? I don't think that's going to happen.
I think it's the opposite. I think that when the GOP looks at the candidates, right, I think they can't look beyond DeSantis. I think they see DeSantis, realize that guy is not the guy, and I, again, have acknowledged that I was wrong. I thought he was, but, I was wrong. And I don't think that...
Wait, what did you say about... You said what were you wrong about? DeSantis?
DeSantis, yeah. I thought DeSantis... Like, looking at DeSantis' resume, right, without him opening his mouth, it's like this guy should be going away the GOP nominee over Trump, over anybody, right? Again, just looking at his resume, you've got Harvard, you've got Yale, you've got, JAG, and, like what he did in JAG and his time in the Department of Defense and DOJ, and then, Congress and governor of Florida. But then he opens his mouth and you're like, oh, never mind. And so I think the GOP they don't have a plan other than Trump, and they don't see anyone else who can, kind of keep, rally the troops.
Yeah, they're cuffed to Trump. But your point about DeSantis opening his mouth, in my view, his biggest issue was he's anti-business. Attacking Disney the way he did and using government against private
Yeah.
sector, that's pretty anti-conservative in my view. I'm a lifelong ideological conservative. I saw that and I said, this guy, forget about it. You can't use the government against private business because you got a political vendetta. I don't care if they're pro-gay or don't say gay or whatever the fuck. I don't care if somebody's gay or not. Go fuck whoever you want. It doesn't matter to me. You shouldn't be getting the state government involved in that, and that's where DeSantis went wrong. He should have just kept his mouth shut on Disney and just. Now, granted, Disney has this, grandfathered, golden brick road with regard to their tax treatment and everything else. But I mean, that's where DeSantis, in my view, went totally wrong because that was completely anti-conservative. He's built his whole campaign around it.
I'm going to do something I hate to do and defend Steve, but he was seeing the DeSantis train coming, and basically, saying this guy is a real threat. This guy's a real thing, and his advice was, if I'm his campaign manager, I'm shutting the fuck up until the very last minute, and as soon as he stopped shutting the fuck up, things went bad.
And
right.
To your point about Disney, not like, so he does that, which I thought was like, that was when my eyebrows went up and said, okay, Ron, what are we doing here, right? But then he doubled down on it, and then not only, like you said, now he's running his campaign on like, I'll do it at the federal level. It's like, well, no. We don't use the government against private business, Bubby. That's not how this works. And I can't say I'm disappointed, because my point with DeSantis was, looking at his resume, looking at who the guy was, I thought he was dangerous. I thought he was the wrong guy in the White House.
He had a ton of momentum. You're right.
Right.
He was the golden child.
Right. And I was like, listen, this guy, if he gets rolling and they do his campaign right, he will blaze through the field and be the president, and that's not good. He does the thing with Disney, verifying my point that he is not the guy that you want. Then he doubled down on it, and then he kept talking, and now it's just like, all right, well, fortunately, he's talked himself out of this thing. But I thought he was a threat on two fronts. I thought that he would be a good candidate, but I also thought he would be the wrong guy you would want in that office. And I guess fortunately he did talk his way out of it. It's not all written in stone yet. Who knows? Things could turn around, but I think he's dead in the water.
I used to live in Orlando. In Orlando, there was an expression that you don't fuck with the rat because the rat has teeth. And
I like that.
It holds up.
Yeah,
that's a powerful
Disney's going to be
organization.
around a lot longer than Ron DeSantis.
Well, and just keep in mind, the primaries have a way of really shifting the perception and dynamic. I mean, you can go back to multiple. I mean, just go back to 2020. Biden wasn't even on the radar, right? I mean,
right.
He came. I mean, it was after the tail end of the primaries where Biden kind of, everything fell apart.
He did what Ron DeSantis should have done.
He said, "All right, we're just going to throw out Uncle Joe." You know what I mean? So things can change very quickly. Because you'll remember back in 2016, it was all Jeb. Everybody thought Jeb Bush was the heir apparent. And everything changes once the primary starts. So I would just keep my eyes on this Vivek guy. He's a young guy. He's a sharp guy. He's said a lot of crazy shit lately. I'm not giving him my full endorsement, but in a perfect world, I'd love to see the Republicans run Vivek and the Democrats run Pete Buttigieg. I like gay Pete. I like gay Pete. I don't like his politics, but he's a smart dude. He's a veteran. He's served this country. He's articulate. I don't agree with him politically, but he's a reasonable dude. You put those two on a ticket, I'll go out and vote, and I won't have. At least I'll be able to know whatever the outcome. You got a competent person sitting in the chair, and we haven't had that kind of an option here, and I can't remember when, since back in the George H.W. Bush days. So I would like to see that match up if it were a perfect world.
So I want real quick. There's two more topics that I want to cover. One we can cover really quickly. Lauren Boebert goes to go see the live play of Beetlejuice, which I didn't know was a play, but okay.
There's the Boebert thing.
Yeah, the Boebert thing. Yeah.
Gal? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, she gets booted out of the play. They said she was laughing loud. She was recording it. Said she was vaping. There's video of her and her date groping each other. He's got his hand on her tit. She goes for his crotch, maybe rubbed his leg, maybe gave him a little, stroke over the pants. They get escorted out. She goes to the, do you know who I am? And I'm going to call the mayor, blah, 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 blah.
Gives the double fingers to the security.
Yeah, I mean, listen, here's the thing. My only issue, I don't even care that she's a Congress. I mean, the behavior's not becoming of a congressperson, but I mean, I think given who we had as president, that's out the window. I don't really have much of an issue with it, except for the fact if she's going to lecture people on family values and all this other shit, you can't be in public getting groped and, given over the pants hand jobs, right? Like, I mean, what are we doing here? Don't sit here and lecture me about, like, and listen, she, between her kid having a kid at the, when he's 17 or whatever, her whole arrest record, her ex-husband's arrest record, all this other stuff, her lecturing me on wholesomeness kind of goes out the window. But then in this instance, right, like in a public, and it's a play, Beetlejuice, there's families around, like, come on, what are we doing, right?
I mean, family values has devolved into meaning I'm pro-gun and anti-abortion. That's what family values means now.
And anti-trans.
And anti-trans. And it's pathetic, but like you said, she's a member of Congress. Now, she won by like 500 votes.
It was close.
And in a district that should have been a walkthrough.
Yeah.
So hopefully there's some restoration of sanity, whether it's, Lauren Boebert or Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'm not going to lump AOC in with them because I think she's an intelligent, accomplished woman. But if there's a Democrat that's that big of a crackpot and you want to put them on the chopping block, I'm fine with that. But this woman is an absolute fucking embarrassment to be a public official in our national government.
She can still get the pipe, though.
Well, if you guys remember, there was a French guy back in 1835 wrote a book called Democracy in America, a guy named Tocqueville. And he had a famous quote that said, you get the government you deserve.
Oh.
I didn't know that it was him that said that, but I've heard that quote.
Well, that speaks, that just really cuts to the bone of it, doesn't it?
It does.
I mean, this was what the people elected, and until you get beat over the head with enough embarrassment and enough ineptitude, you get what you deserve. I mean, you gotta. I mean, the power of the vote comes with consequences on both sides.
Sure.
And so really, we could take a piss on Boebert all we want, but is she to blame? I mean, you can't blame a dog for being a dog. You got to blame the fucking voters for being so goddamn stupid to put her in office.
Yeah, twice, really.
Twice.
I mean, it's first time, okay, whatever. Second time, there was enough ammunition not to do it again.
Exactly. They reelected her. That's the real head scratcher. So come on, what the fucking fuck?
Right. Ultimately, that's
Can
literally.
we quote you as what the fucking fuck?
We're gonna. So I want to jump. I want to stay in Colorado.
Here we go.
I want to stay in Colorado. Take a trip to Boulder. Coach Prime, Deion Sanders is sort of taking the college football world by storm. He coached at Jackson State last year, HBCU. They pretty much ran the table. His son quarterbacked, and he makes the jump to Colorado. And that Colorado, the Buffaloes were 1-11 last year, and then this year they just all they did was open up with TCU, which played in the college football championship championship last year, and they beat them in a shootout. And then they go and they beat, they just beat up on Nebraska. And this week they're playing Colorado State. And the coach from Colorado State had some critique of Deion, saying that, his mother taught him to take off his sunglasses and hat when he talks to adults. And I thought Deion's response to it was perfect. From coach speak, Deion gathered the team around and said, man, I was just watching film. Then I hear this coach from Colorado State talking about me and making it personal, right? And then he keeps repeating, he made it personal. The team jumps in, and every time he says personal, they repeat it. And I just have a feeling that Colorado is going to dismantle Colorado State this week. Those kids are going to get embarrassed more so than they were before because their coach opened their mouth, and I'm here for it. What say you, Ben?
Well, listen, I'm not a big I'm not in the weeds when it comes to college football, but to your point in this story, which has obviously been a national story, and just Dion bringing that program from, from the ashes. It's hugely impressive. I think on any level of sports, I don't care if it's midget hockey or, NCAA football or pro NFL football, you put bulletin board material out like that, you give the opposition that kind of motivation. Never a good idea. And clearly, to your point, the way Dion has gotten these kids motivated and inspired and done a hell of a job recruiting as well. He's brought in a ton of new talent there into that program. Very impressive. And with you, probably ill-advised to give them that kind of material relative to motivation. And so we'll see how it goes. But I wish him well. I grew up watching prime time, with the Atlanta Falcons. I remember what it was his first ever play. I think it was a punt return for a touchdown, right, when he was playing for the Falcons back in the day. He was a lot of fun to watch. So I hope he does well.
And it's interesting too, right? I mean, because I think there's we've got people who support him, right, and then the people who don't like him. Right, it's interesting to hear the different reasons why they don't like him. A lot of people, oh man, he talks shit about everybody else, and I was pointing this out to a couple of different people. Deion Sanders really wasn't a trash talker in terms of other people. He talked about himself. He talked himself up a lot, but he wasn't really about trashing opponents.
He was a showboat.
Right, he was a showboat, right? Like he was flashy, right? And people, for whatever reason, they despise the showboat. And I'm just curious as to why, right? Like, especially in sports, like everybody's thing is like, oh, I like that guy because he scored a touchdown and he handed the ball to the ref and then he went to the sideline and acted like he'd been there before. Like, bitch, do you know how hard it is to score a fucking touchdown? Like, if a dude wants to get out there and do the electric slide, I'm all for it. I've never had an issue with and oddly enough, I really wasn't much of a showboater, usually because when I scored, I was tired and I didn't have the energy to do anything. But I've never had an issue with, the flashier guys, right? Like some guys, like that's just how they keep their edge. Some guys talk shit to other guys. Like some guys just are angry and mean and on the verge of homicidal, maniac thoughts. But whatever it takes to keep that edge, are you the I want my guys to be humble guy, or do you not care? Just do your
I'm
job.
more I want my guys to be humble, but keep in mind, that kind of keeping your edge and that kind of like some of the trash talk is like that is a tactic in the heat of the moment. I mean, the shit talk is a psychological tool to use against your opponent. You want to get them off their
Get them off the game.
Kind of their mental fortitude and stand. So I don't blame folks for using that type of a tactic, and it's different at the coaching level. But I mean, if I go back and think about guys like, I was critical of guys like Johnny Manziel, or if you guys remember Chris Perez, it was a closer for the Tribe.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't like, because when you think about the way people view athletes, you generally find a way to identify with them or disidentify with them. If you identify with them, you feel like they're an extension of yourself. Like they would emulate the way you would behave in that scenario.
Sure.
And those that don't, you tend to, kind of be critical of them. And there's nothing wrong with that, because at the end of the day, it's just entertainment. These are just characters in a movie, essentially.
Right.
But, I'm more of the, hand the ball to the ref and keep your mouth shut, because generally over time, again, it depends on the sport, I guess, but you guys know I've been a hockey guy my whole life. That's what was most successful were the guys that just were the grinders and didn't flash too much. But I get it. I get the flashiness, because to me it's a psychological tool to use against opponents, and Dion using it here on the bulletin board in the locker room and getting guys motivated around it. So you can't argue with that.
I have a bulletin board story. When I was at WVU, Missouri was coming to Morgantown, and someone posted the Big Eight's going to teach the Little East a lesson in real football. And that was all over the weight room at WVU. And we went out and smoked Missouri in a game we were substantial underdogs. And for that reason, I think Colorado State's coach, if I'm playing for Colorado State, I'm pissed. I'm like, dude, we're already going up against a superior team. And now we got to deal with your fucking mouth. You're not getting out of the field.
Yeah.
Now, I will say this. We're talking about Colorado State football. If this guy doesn't pop off at the mouth, to this moment, I don't know the name of Colorado State's coach, but we're still talking about the guy. So if he wants to be a public figure, fine, but you better fucking win, dude. Because
I mean, like, I think, look, you're playing Colorado, so people are going to talk about you just because everybody's talking about Colorado right now.
That's true.
But so I don't know if look, I don't even think. I think with a lot of these coaches, they just don't like Deion, right? I think they're the guys who didn't like the flashiness. They don't like the way that he's doing the recruiting. They don't like it. And so they want to lash out and they open their mouths. And like, look, this is sports, right? Like Nick Saban ain't gonna say shit about Deion. He's just gonna go out there and try to beat him, right? He may talk shit after in the press conference, right? Because Nick has been known to kind of go off a little bit in the press conference.
See, that's the other issue because he stepped in and had immediate success. So a lot of these coaches are like, this guy hasn't cut his teeth, man. Like, he hasn't paid the dues. They're upset. They're jealous, essentially, because he's like, this guy just stepped in and he's making us look like shit.
Well, and my pushback to that is, I'm sorry, my man paid 15 years in the NFL, right?
Right.
And
I agree.
and he's
that's
like,
why I think that there's so much hate for Deion, because it's like this guy's just showing you that, hey, if you got the pedigree, it's not about X's and O's. I mean, I think you'd agree with this. It's not about X's and O's. It's about motivating young kids.
Yeah, and I mean, I think yes, I think it's absolutely about like college football. Urban Meyer is a perfect example of that. He was a great recruiter and apparently less of a motivator and more of a dictator. But Urban Meyer was a shitty coach in terms of X's and O's and strategy.
Yeah, and just tactical decisions.
Yeah, we saw that firsthand.
He was just an amazing recruiter, and the talent won out. And I would argue though that Deion's probably going to give you a hell of a lot more in the X's and O's. And Deion he coached high school. He coached a high school team for a couple of years. Then he went to Jackson State, and he was the coach there. So he may not have taken the traditional route, but I would argue that, I mean, starting with that 15-year Hall of Fame NFL career, and then for him to step back and then be a high school coach and then go coach at a historically black college. Right, where none of these other even some of these other coaches wouldn't even take a job from one of those schools, for any number of reasons, quote unquote. So for him to go there and then go to Colorado, which was 1-11, it's not like he walked into Alabama or Georgia.
Right.
So I don't want to say he didn't. I don't know if it's fair to say that he didn't earn his way up, but the quickness in which he's seen success, I think it is jealousy, right? It's like, fuck this guy. I had to go coach at Eastern Michigan.
He disrupted the Good Old Boys Network.
Right, I had to go coach at Eastern Michigan and get my ass kicked by, all these big schools, to get to where I'm at. And then this dude, so I could see it. I could see it both ways. But Ben, we want to thank you again for. Go ahead.
By the way, also just good for CFB broadly, right? Because it just creates more parity, and there's just been so much concentration in the major conferences, where it's just good to see parity, not just for kids for looking for options to go find the next level, but good for the sport, good for sponsors, good for bowl games, good all around, because you need a dispersion of talent and winning programs.
And this is definitely a product in a large part of the transfer portal.
Oh yeah,
because 10 years ago he wouldn't. I mean, I heard an interview yesterday where someone said they've got 80 new kids at that school.
Yeah,
I don't know if that was a hyperbolic number.
He cut the whole team except for saved for like 10 kids. Cut all of them. Said they weren't up to standard, and then brought all new kids in via recruiting in the transfer portal. And the transfer portal is amazing. I just think back how if it were around when I was in college, it would have literally changed the trajectory of my playing career in life because. I was a large recruit, big-time recruit that decided to go to West Point, transferred, and my options, if I wanted to play the next year, I had to go to a FCS school, or, if I wanted... Sit
out a year, yeah.
Right, or I would have had to sit out a year. Well, now I would have been able to transfer from West Point. I could have gone... I was heavily recruited. Nick Saban wanted me at Michigan State, right? Told me I made a bad decision by choosing to go to West Point Military Academy, right? And so, I could have left and, I don't know, I could have gone back. He was willing to even take me, but there was nothing we could do to get around me sitting out. So then that's how I end up at UMass. But if that transfer portal is there, and you got to remember who was at Michigan State at the time, right? You put me and TJ Duckett in the same backfield together, child please. Anyway.
All right.
So before we go, guys,
Yep.
before we go, look, we got a big Monday night game here. Browns Steelers divisional game. Browns obviously just embarrassed the Bengals on Sunday. Surprised the hell out of just about everybody.
You're really gonna do
Watson
this, Ben?
didn't look great, right? He ran around a little bit. He didn't look great throwing the ball, but man, that defense was really something else. What do you guys think about the game Monday night? You beat the Steelers, going 2-0 in the division. You're setting up for a really nice run maybe this season. I don't know. What you guys
Okay.
think
Do you know that Steve is a huge Steelers fan?
that's why I'm asking, because I want to kind of.
So you know you poked the bear and you're going to go away.
And see how he feels. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate it.
Look, so here's what it is. Like, Steelers theoretically should be an underdog in this game, right? They just got drilled by San Francisco.
Even at home?
Yeah, I mean, you just got drilled by San Francisco by 23 points or whatever. It's Kenny Pickett versus Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson was the league MVP, or close to it or whatever. And yeah, I think he was. And then Kenny Pickett, is in his second year, and the jury's still out on him. But it is the Steelers. It is Mike Tomlin. They are at home. It's Monday night. Our record on Monday night at home is pretty good. I think we're like 20-0 over the last, however many years. So honestly, I think the Steelers bounce back. I think it ends up being a close game. That I think the Steelers will win it, and chances are it's going to be because of T.J. Watt. Like, T.J. Watt is just a different animal. Like, Myles Garrett.
He's a hell of a player.
Myles Garrett is really good. Myles Garrett is one of the best defensive players in the league, but T.J. Watt is better. And I say this because it's not only does he get the sacks, but when T.J. Watt makes plays, it's when they have to happen. There's 2 minutes left. You need the ball. You need a sack. You need a stop. He gets it, right? The Steelers. Like, I can go back the last 3 years. I could probably count on. I could probably get up into both hands counting the number of times he literally made the play that saved that game. And to me, like, there's just a different level. That's when you get into the Reggie White, Bruce Smith sort of game wrecker, game changer. And Myles Garrett could be that, but I don't know if Myles Garrett has that edge. At least he hasn't shown it yet. Like, Myles Garrett sometimes can disappear in key moments, right? T.J. Watt, on the other hand, they're like, all right, well, we're going to block you with 4 guys and hope that's enough, and sometimes it's not.
I would just point out that play Garrett made on that 4th down play from a little bit over the 30, where the Bengals tried to go for it on 4th, and he got that sack on Burrow. That was just a critical play that Myles Garrett came up strong. Let me ask you guys this too, though, just on Deshaun, because it's obviously a polarizing figure. There's a lot of folks that have kind of been off-put given his off-the-field struggles and controversy. Is that something that you guys think about? Does it frame your opinion of him as a player?
No.
Because, there's a lot of folks that I speak to that are just, and frankly, like lifetime Browns fans that have just been totally off-put by it. I don't really know what to think. I just try not to think about it too much. I mean, again, I look at it as entertainment, so I'm not really all that interested in their off-the-field activities. But where do you guys stand on the Deshaun piece?
I'm a Bills fan, so it's easy for me to just duck this.
I'm sorry about the Jets. That was a tough loss given Aaron Rodgers.
You're just coming out swinging today. We bring up you're poking Steve. I was very, very. I was very calm and rational during that game.
Browns are undefeated, so I can poke around. I'm going to take my opportunity. It's very rare the Browns are undefeated.
When you talk to a winless Bills and Steelers fan as an undefeated Browns fan, I'm sure it feels good. Enjoy it while it lasts.
I know exactly. I'm not going to let the moment be fleeting.
This reminds me of when Lee Corso coached Indiana, scored a touchdown against Ohio State, and had a picture taken in front of the scoreboard because they were ahead before they lost 51-7.
Well, I'll just say this: as a Browns fan, I think ahead, and if you guys live in Cleveland, you can imagine what the city would be like in December if we have commanded the division and we're heading to the playoffs with little momentum. I know I'm getting way ahead of myself, but we haven't seen this in over 20 years. And since I was a kid before the Browns left in '99, we haven't had that kind of excitement. Of course, we had it was with early 2000s, Butch Davis, Kelly Holcomb. We were beating the Steelers. Steve, you remember this game? We were beating the Steelers 35-7 at halftime. We blew that lead, right? Baker took us, a couple years ago into the play with that helmet-to-helmet against the Chiefs in the divisional game with the touchback call. That changed everything. And the Chiefs went on to win the Super Bowl that year. I mean, so if the Browns have some momentum and they're in command of the division going into, the end of the season, back half of the season, you can imagine what the city's going to be like. And it's going to be a lot of fun. It could be a lot of fun and good for the local economy and all that stuff. So, I watch it as kind of just a tangential fan, and to me, I try to look at it as entertainment versus religion. But I'd love to see the Browns, finally get over the hump. And
to that point, I agree. I think the sports teams being good is good for the city. It drives so much business. There's a lot of positivity. And again, it's just the economic impact of, these professional sports teams being good, you really can't be denied, right? Like, so, you root for that. But that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and need the Steelers to level set you people, all right? Get rid of some of this positivity, right? Go ahead and knock you down a peg on Monday night so we can kind of get back to reality. Everybody get to 1-1, and then we can all calm down. But I am excited about the game. I love football. Having played it, in college and been so close to it for so long, like I put more stock into it than I probably should. But I also own that, and I won't shy away from it, right? Like I like, it's important to me. I think there's a lot of value to the game overall in terms of developing people. And it's not always you get out of it what you put into it. But at the same time, it presents a lot of opportunities, and on small levels, whether it's kids getting scholarships or it's the generating money for universities or generating money for cities, municipalities, tax base, all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of positive that comes out of it. So this time of year for me I love it.
Oh, look, 100%, and I would say just organized sports, generally speaking, particularly when you're in this culture right now of kids, addicted to video games and leading these sedentary lifestyles, just organized sports, getting kids active, learning discipline, learning a team dynamic. Doesn't matter if you're playing hockey, football, soccer, whatever your flavor of choice. It's something that we need to embrace and support at the local levels. So I agree with you there. And just with regard to, you mentioned just the economic impact of professional sports, I would just also point out an area of criticism for me, and a lot of people would push back on me for this opinion, but, the Indians going from Indians to Guardians, I just thought it was just a terrible, again, there was pressure on the organization to do it, but just from a business standpoint, and just the value of that intellectual property, right? When you looked at the history of merchandise sales and, the cheap Wahoo stuff and everything, say what you want. People say that it was racist or whatever, but I sit here and I watch the Kansas City Chiefs fans doing a fucking goddamn tomahawk chop and shit, man. Or the fucking guy down in Florida State running around with a fucking face paint headdress on, throwing fucking spears in the middle of the fucking field, but we can't be called the Indians? Like, I don't know, bro.
He was actual Indian,
and you think about what that's done to the team hasn't performed well this year, and there were some blips this year where attendance was up, but in aggregate, I think you've had a lot of people that were lifelong Tribe fans, myself included. I just don't engage with the team the way I used to, and it's not. People try to frame, "Oh, you're boycotting me." It's not a fucking boycott. It's just I can't identify. It's not the team that I knew, and I still love baseball, but I'm not alone. And people want to say like, "Oh, you're an outlier." You're not. I'm not, and I can tell you that anecdotally. And so, these professional sports teams, what they do for this economy. Keep in mind, the Tribe. You're talking about 82 games downtown every season versus the Browns with 8. Or right. Maybe it's 8 or 9, right? So you think about the impact of, and of course, and we'll give Cavs credit. Cavs have an exciting team. I'm not a big NBA guy, but they seem to have an exciting team. They're coming around. I think they're on the up and up. But it's really sad to see what's happened with the baseball team. And I don't know. We'll see. There's a private equity guy in there that I've heard rumors that might want to make some changes if he gets more influence relative to his ownership stake.
But I also would argue too with the Guardians or the Tribe that win. start winning, right? Like, and let's get into the playoffs and have a deep run in the playoffs, get yourself to a World Series, win a World Series. That'd be fantastic, right? And that can help kind of solve some of those ills. I get the the connection to the Chief Wahoo and all that other stuff, but I think that winning can go a long way to help sort of kind of mend that, fix that wound. It may never heal it.
You're right. Look, if they were to be successful and win, it would alleviate a lot of that disdain or a lot of those negative feelings. But the problem is that, as a guy growing up, I grew up here in Cleveland, and it's just like it's like the Steelers are to you. Those teams become part of your identity, and it becomes an extension of yourself. And when that gets adulterated in a way that, you're just kind of not aligned with, it just doesn't sit well with you. And I'm a guy that was a season ticket holder for many years. I'm talking full season tickets. And even when I lived in Chicago, I still had partial season tickets. So I was always involved in the franchise economically. And, I'm just not inclined to do that anymore. And again, I still root for him. I want to see him win. But it's just not the same. And I think, again, from a business standpoint, which is what these things exist. I mean, teams exist to make money, whether you like it or not. Yeah. I don't feel like it was a great business decision, whether it was imposed upon them or otherwise. It was just a shame to see.
I do need to push back that the Seminoles actually are backed by the Seminole Nation. Now I'm defending Florida State, which I hate doing. So you made me defend Steve and Florida State today.
Right.
Thanks, but and then you poked the bear with the Steelers thing.
But we could go on. I mean, there's there's the Chicago Blacks. And by the way, I'm friends with the Wirtz family, and they had pressure to change that brand identity, and they told the interest groups to go fuck themselves. That's an original 6 NHL team, and they're like, hey, the Blackhawks, you can't do this anymore. Like, fuck you. What are you going to do about it? They just said we're not going to change. You look at shit. I mean, you could even get into the other side of the racial spectrum. The Fighting Irish. You got a little drunk leprechaun. White dude. I mean, tell me that's not like a caricature of the Irish. I mean, there's any number of there's any number of these analogs that you could point to that could be potentially perceived as somehow, I guess, offensive or whatever. But it's just strange to me that the Cleveland Indians were selected amongst all of these other this whole mosaic of other I guess what could be perceived as offensive franchises or monikers, and you're talking about 100-year baseball history here in Cleveland, and somehow we got kind of forced into making that kind of change. I just really unfortunate, and again, I don't want to beleaguer the point because it's you can't change history, but it just you bring up the Seminole Nation. Supporting Florida State, that's great. I mean, what the hell were the Indians supposed to do? I mean, this whole notion that this is somehow offensive. What are we supposed to do? I mean, we live in Cuyahoga County, right? There's Mahoning County. There's Miami County. What are we supposed to change the name of the counties to because they reference Native Americans? I mean, what the fuck? I mean, where do you draw the line? It's just, I don't get it.
Ben, this is another conversation that we'd have for a very long time, but we're not quite at hour 45. So
dude, this was a lot of fun. I'm glad we got to talk markets. It was always great chatting with you guys, and we could talk for another 2 hours if we wanted to. So
right. Which is what I was afraid is going to happen. So
we'll set it up for another one in a few weeks or whatever. But always great chatting with you guys, and we'll see what happens with regard to markets into the close of the year. But you got this election cycle popping up here. We're at the cusp of it. And by the way, just related to markets, I mean, that's another thing to keep in mind. It could be a dampening effect on markets. We didn't get a chance to talk about derivatives and zero date expiration options. We'll talk about that next time. But just the dampening effect of volatility in the market isn't just zero date options. And we won't get into that right now. Obviously, we don't have time.
Thanks for leaving the audience on the edge of their seats.
Yeah, we'll talk about that next time. But also just our proximity to an election cycle. You would imagine that this administration will find ways to just massage the economy just enough to make it sure it doesn't fall out of bed ahead of an election. And I'm sure you guys can understand what I mean by that.
Yeah, we do. All right, Steve, you want any closing thoughts?
No, we're all good, man. Like I said, thank you for jumping on with us. It was a great conversation. Weeks here. And, everybody have a great weekend.
And Ben,
got it. Yeah.
if you got a final remark, the floor is yours.
No, I just appreciate you guys. Always fun to chat. You guys hit me up anytime, and looking forward to the next chat.
All right,
Thank you again for coming on. We are at Whiskey Congress on Instagram, Twitter, X, whatever the fuck, and Threads, whatever the thing that no one cares about anymore is.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks again, and we are done.